Hello, it is me, Spikerzky, and I figure it is high time that I stop neglecting my channel. By which I mean post a single video and continue neglecting my channel because hey, I'm still me after all. I wanted to make a more professional review than I have in the past, something that has good production values, a good sense of humor, and can still be analytical, informative, and entertaining. All at the same time, all smashed together like that. But then I remembered something. My video recording equipment is subpar, shall we say. My sense of humor isn't all that great, it's somewhere between that of a rock and a tin can. I can't write in a structured analytical format, and my editing software is very, very old. So, I'm going to throw all sense of seriousness, professionalism, and quality right out the window, and I'm gonna wing it. Because who needs effort anyway? Everyone knows apathy is the true sign of professionalism. Anyway, in line with the theme of not giving a single damn about writing, we're gonna talk about a really weird game today. What makes it weird? Monkeys. The game of the day is Ape Escape, and admittedly the beard of Ape Escape is mostly confined to the setup and the fiction of the game, but hey, it's still there, so I will bring it up anyway.
You play as Spike, the creatively named little kid with a mess of a haircut that any shonen character would be proud of. Spike and his friend, whose name I don't remember and will therefore call Sir Frederick Butts, are going to visit a friendly professor's lab so you can play with his time machine. Shockingly enough, they found apes. An ape named Spectre somehow got his hands on the professor's brain power boosting helmet, and is now arming an army of apes and sending them into the past to rewrite history and take over the world.
Of course!
The story of Ape Escape, while a bit odd, is also 100% irrelevant, because with the exception of some setup at the beginning of the game, there's really not a whole lot that happens until the very tail end of the game, and with the exception of one kind of unimportant plot twist, there's really not a whole lot to get invested in. And the voice acting is kind of questionable.
Very good. Then let's get going. Whoa! Please help me!
Bottom line, I didn't find the story interesting. It didn't seem especially well written or presented. Fortunately, Ape Escape is a platformer. It doesn't need a good story to live up to genre standards. So, how is the platforming? Does it hold up on that end?
Well, good news everyone, all the effort that's missing in the story department seems to have been spent trying to make the game actually fun to play, and that attempt has mostly paid off. Movement-wise, Spike himself only has a somewhat decent feeling and functional double jump and a butt stomp that serves more of a theoretical purpose than an actually functional one. Normally, this would be a major strike against the game, especially when comparing the game to the likes of Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie, where you had a bunch of different moves used in concert, providing for more interesting level design. Fortunately, the developers also provided an assortment of random gadgets to use in the levels. Some of these, like the propeller, the super speed granting hula hoop, and this scuba thingamajig, give you more maneuverability and make up for the lack of mechanical depth that there would have been if you'd been limited to the jumping on its own. The others, like the RC car, the totally not a lightsaber, and the slingshot, are used for enemy fighting and button pressing shenanigans. Throw in the occasional vehicle sequence, including a big old tank, and you've got a game that certainly has mechanical variety, if not a whole lot of challenge or depth. One design choice that I really give the designers credit for was the choice to keep the gameplay in a level continuous. Ape Escape levels consist of you running around looking for those darn treacherous gun-wielding monkeys, much like Mario 64 had you running around looking for stars. However, while Mario 64 had separate, slightly different iterations of the same stages for each of the stage's objective stars, Ape Escape just plops you down in the level and has you keep running around exploring the place until you catch enough monkeys to move on. While Mario 64 had things broken up like it did to allow for the variation in the layout of the level between challenges, a neat choice to say the least, the Ape Escape developers' decision not to do so actually still works to the game's benefit. The continuous action, combined with Spike's decently fast movement speed, the frantic fleeing of the monkeys when you find them, and some admittedly excellent and oddly awesome sound effects upon catching the damn things, actually manages to give the game a real don't-stop-for-nothing feel that kept me entertained despite the early level's low level of challenge.
It's surprising how much that kind of gameplay flow can really draw a player in. It's pretty sweet. But the game does start to show some problems. The longer I played it, the more I got fed up with a certain aspect of the game. The enemies. I didn't find them to be particularly well made, if you get my drift.
Most of them are just the very definition of non-threatening, which isn't too much of a problem, I guess, just a bit of a bummer. I mean, what's the point of including enemies if they aren't actually going to be a threat? Most of the enemies in this game are just minor nuisances, but one enemy in particular was egregiously ineffective. It's not even hitting near me when it's standing still. It's like it got stuck in some kind of behavioral loop. It's not a one-time thing either. This happened every time I saw one of these guys. And when there are 3 or 4 of them in one level in the same room, it starts getting a little irritating that this enemy behavior made it into the final version of the game. If enemies that do nothing aren't enough, there was also a case where something akin to a little mini-boss challenge thing just didn't trigger. I mean, there's clearly something that's supposed to happen here, but nope, nothing doing.
There's another group of enemies that I have basically the exact opposite problem with, and that would actually be the monkeys.
The whole point of the levels is to go catch the monkeys. You'd expect the developers to actually do good with them. You'd expect them to make the monkeys actually fun to chase and not a chore. And you know what? At first they are. You sneak up on them with relative ease as long as they're not running around like a moron, and you can chase them when needed. Every once in a while, one will be armed, giving you a real reason to try sneaking, and give you a little rougher chase if you fail. But it was all manageable. And quick, still contributing to the fast, frantic feel that makes the game fun for me. As the game progresses, the monkeys give more kinds of attacks and attack more often. That makes sense, certainly. You want to keep it somewhat challenging, right? Problem is, the monkeys just become erratic. They don't have much to speak of in terms of attack animations. There's no telegraphing in their attacks. And since everything they do happens quickly, players are given very little time to react. There's no prediction, no skill, just getting swatted out of nowhere.
Does this make it impossible to catch the monkeys? No. Does it strike me as particularly unreasonable? No. But it is a bit of a drag, and it's these kinds of things that make Ape Escape this weird jumble of fun and annoying that's slightly harder to recommend. That aside, how does the game look? Bearing in mind that my capture card can make everything look terrible, I think Ape Escape actually holds up fairly well.
Sure, these are early PlayStation graphics, but the developers did have the sense to use exaggerated, colorful, cartoony graphics. That strikes me as a pretty great decision. The limitations of the hardware would make realism a bit difficult, but the developers knew the console's limitations, picked an aesthetic that they knew they could handle, and would hold up for a while. My only complaints are a few bouts of texture swimminess that was common on the console, and, well, one case where a texture just appeared to not be there. That was odd.
All in all, I suppose I would recommend Ape Escape. Sure, there isn't a real story to speak of, the gameplay is kind of simple, and I have my issues with the enemy behavior, but it is a fun little romp. Besides, there is actually one aspect of the gameplay that the developers deserve a whole lot of credit for, and it's actually something that's a lot more interesting in the current video game market, climate, thing, what have you, than it was back in the 90s when the game was introduced, published, that. And if you'll allow me to put on my hat of analysis, also known as my hipster hat, and if you will allow me to jump cut this monologue all the hell so I don't have to spend hours and hours saying it right, I will tell you, anyone with even a passing interest in video games is probably familiar with the idea of motion controls, largely due to the all-encompassing cultural phenomenon that was the Nintendo Wii. And since the Wii's release, motion controls have become a pretty popular idea, if not necessarily one that's implemented all that well very often. And while there are a multitude of reasons that motion controls are interesting, one of the biggest reasons is that creative use of motion controls can give a heightened sense of player agency and just immersion in the game. Totally get that sentiment, but there seems to be this idea going around that motion controls is the only reliable way to give players a connection between what they're doing control-wise and what's actually happening on the screen. There are people who think that you can't do that with one of these. But then there's Ape Escape, this little old game made by a little team. One of the first games to make use of Sony's DualShock controller. They needed to show people what these little sticks could be used for. So they used their heads, and they gave us a bunch of little gadgets to play around with in the game.
But need to spin that hula hoop? Spin the stick. Rowing a boat, you have to actually coordinate like you're rowing a boat. Alternate to go forward, or go back, spin them in the same direction to turn. It's sweet. And a tank, each stick controls one tread. Push them both forward or back to go that way, or push them in opposite directions to make them turn.
Just a few small examples, and while they are just that, small examples, this tiny touch is basically Ape Escape's one defining memorable feature. It gave Ape Escape a really tactile feel that made it a whole lot of fun. And while I may have had my problems with the game, this is still just such an interesting thing that I think I need to give hats off to the developers. Whoever made this thing, bravo! You done good, you did something interesting, and that is enough to be remembered by this particular idiot on the internet, so I thank you once again. Also, the music is great.